Good morning and welcome to morning prayers. I greet you in the name of the Lord, so I invite you to respond when I say the Lord is here, to respond with His Spirit is with us. So I greet you in the name of the Lord. The Lord is here. His Spirit is with us. As I was looking over the various program timetables for this week, I noticed that Emily Ralph-Servant was giving a talk to our PhD students this morning called Life After the Doctorate. And I remember Emily's Viva because it was one of the first ones that we did on Zoom because she had a baby and so she couldn't easily travel overseas for her Viva. And it also made me think of finishing my own PhD and crossing over that life before and life after. And I clearly remember the day that I sent my thesis off to the binders because my husband was traveling to Somalia via London, so he took it with him. I had been nagging him for weeks to get travel insurance because at that time the Foreign Office didn't recommend traveling to Somalia. And he said finally, "Sandra, if I promise to get it, will you stop nagging me?" And I said, "Fine." So there I was, thesis off, and I was looking forward to spending some time with my children who I hadn't seen for about 72 hours. And I got a phone call. "Sandra, you remember that travel insurance that you asked me to get? I didn't quite get round to it." Well, that's the only time I think in 25 years I've actually said no to my husband. And I said, "If you don't get that insurance, you're not getting on the plane." And you can ask me at coffee how that turned out. Life before and life after. You enter a doorway or you cross a threshold from one thing or space into something different. We all experience these transitions in our lives, these doorways that mark different times or spaces in our lives that are significant. Christian conversion for many marks a significant before and after in their life. You know, that story of the fishermen just leaving their boats and following Jesus provides, I think, an evocative image of passing from one realm to another. But those of us who don't have a dramatic conversion story might think of other doorways or other life stages or rites of passage. I'm just now reading a book I've had forever on my shelf but haven't read, Richard Rohr's Falling Upward, which is about that transition from your first stage of life into that second stage of life, which I'm definitely now in. I wonder where you are. Maybe you're well into something. The door that you entered is a long way behind you, and maybe the one in front of you is quite a long way at the distance. Maybe there's a door ahead of you just now. Or maybe you've been passing through something just now. I've had a number of them in my life, leaving home and starting university, getting married, giving birth to children. Even this summer, I had a couple quite significant ones. My father died, and my son left for university, both natural stages of life, but both weighty and surrounded by a complexity of emotions. Back home, I belong to a group called Soul Circle, and each month we gather in a very Quaker-esque kind of way to share a reading together and then spend some time with it individually and then together as a group. And every September, we read something about thresholds. And this September, we read this piece that you have before you, Thresholds by John Donahue. The piece, it was either on your chair when you came into the chapel or it was visible to you online when you joined the virtual prayer room. He was an Irish poet and author and priest, died in 2008. And this piece comes from his book, To Bless the Space Between Us. So I'm going to read it aloud now as a prayer of sorts. And as I do, I encourage you to be attentive to maybe a word or a phrase that just strikes you. And you are, if you're here in the chapel, there's a pen on your chair, and I encourage you to underline that word or phrase. A threshold is not a simple boundary. It is a frontier that divides two different territories, rhythms, and atmospheres. Indeed, it is a lovely testimony to the fullness and integrity of the experience of a stage of life that it intensifies towards the end into a real frontier that cannot be crossed without the heart being passionately engaged and woken up. At this threshold, a great complexity of emotions comes alive: confusion, fear, excitement, sadness, hope. This is one of the reasons such vital crossings were always clothed in ritual. It is wise in your own life to be able to recognize and acknowledge the key thresholds, to take your time, to feel all the varieties of presence that accrue there, to listen inward with complete attention until you hear the inner voice calling you forward. The time has come to cross. To acknowledge and cross a new threshold is always a challenge. It demands courage and also a sense of trust in whatever is emerging. This becomes essential when a threshold opens suddenly in front of you, one for which you had no preparation. This could be illness, suffering, or loss. Because we are so engaged with the world, we usually forget how fragile life can be and how vulnerable we always are. It takes only a couple of seconds for a life to change irreversibly. Suddenly, you stand on completely strange ground, and a new course of life has to be embraced. Especially at such times, we desperately need blessing and protection. You look back at the life you have lived up to a few hours before, and it suddenly seems so far away. Think for a moment how across the world someone's life has just changed, irrevocably, permanently, and not necessarily for the better. And everything that was once so steady, so reliable, must now find a new way of unfolding. Though we know one another's names and recognize one another's faces, we never know what destiny shapes each life. The script of individual destiny is secret. It is hidden behind and beneath the sequence of happenings that is continually unfolding for us. Each life is a mystery that is never finally available to the mind's light or questions. That we are here is a huge affirmation. Somehow, life needed us and wanted us to be. To sense and trust this primeval acceptance can open a vast spring of trust within the heart. It can free us into a natural courage that casts out fear and opens up our lives to become voyages of discovery, creativity, and compassion. No threshold need be a threat, but rather an invitation and a promise. Whatever comes, the great sacrament of life will remain faithful to us, blessing us always with visible signs of invisible grace. We merely need to trust. I'm just going to pause for a minute for you to think about the word or two that drew you into this reading. in the context of a new academic year starting here at Cliff, I'm particularly mindful of the phrase, a sense of trust in whatever is emerging. But I'm mostly drawn to O'Donoghue's final words. Whatever comes, the great sacrament of life will remain faithful to us, blessing us always with visible signs of invisible grace. I think O'Donoghue captures for us the significance of the thresholds and knows, as he says, that especially at these times, we desperately need blessing and protection. So whatever threshold you have crossed, maybe it's starting a new degree, maybe it is that passing over from life before to life after the doctorate. Whatever you're facing or is looming in front of you, be assured that Christ is with you, and be confident that you will find him here in the midst of community. And as we close today, I'm going to end with an excerpt from an Irish prayer of protection that is familiar to many of us. And I invite you to stand and just hold your hands out as a blessing to those who are standing with you and among you, and to our extended community online, if you're able. Christ with me, Christ before me, Christ behind me, Christ in me, Christ beneath me, Christ above me, Christ on my right, Christ on my left, Christ when I lie down, Christ when I sit down, Christ when I arise, Christ in the heart of everyone who thinks of me, Christ in the mouth of everyone who speaks of me, Christ in every eye that sees me, Christ in every ear that hears me. I arise today through a mighty strength, the invocation of the Trinity, through belief in the threeness, through confession of the oneness of the Creator of creation. Amen. Go in peace.